Good morning, guys. It is the Awesemo NBA Strategy Show, sponsored by Yahoo, also produced by Tyler Xander. Last minute, talk about Tyler Hero. The real Tyler Hero is Tyler Xander over here, because so what happens is I'm getting ready to do the show to host. I've got my run sheet together. I've got all my basketball research done and all that. I know that Terry's going to be here. And then I find out that Mike, who is going to be producing, had a power outage. Not his fault. This happens, power outage. But then I found out nobody else is available. Greg, could you produce the show while you host it? It's like, I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. So as of like 10 minutes ago, I thought I was going to be producing. Tyler stepped up. So want to give him props. Thank you very much for doing that. Also, shout out to Yahoo for sponsoring the show. If you guys are just joining in now, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Terry, how's your weekend going so far?
Pretty early on in it, but so far I woke up, it's pouring rain, it's shitty out, and cramming for a basketball show. So it's been a fun one. Looks like it's going to be a day of just staying inside and doing a lot of DFS related stuff. So I'm always on board for that. How about you, bud?
Yeah, probably about the same. I'm looking outside. I mean, it is a pretty heavy blizzard type conditions right here. Heavy snow, winds, probably why Mike's power went out. So
I would think.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those days. I saw Batman last night. I like that a lot. Oh, nice. Some regrets. Have you seen Batman yet?
I did. I saw it the Thursday it came out at midnight. So I saw it from midnight to 3 a.m.
It's so a little bit of regrets for me, because I did go see, and I'm never, almost every day I do live before lock on Friday and Saturday. This is one of the only days that I didn't have it. So I ended up withdrawing my DFS entries last minute. I was like, you know what? I'll just go to the movies, just going to focus on this. And then everybody crushed. Like Ryan did really well. Eric did really well. I was like, shit, this is why I never should go outside. I should just be focusing on NBA DFS, which is what we are going to be doing today. And 7-game slate, starting with the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Miami Heat. Of course, the Miami Heat, who have the second Tyler Hero. The real Tyler Hero is here, but they also have the fake Tyler Hero on their team. Jimmy Butler not on the injury report today. He has been banged up quite a bit as of late. Has missed games for a whole handful of different reasons: sinus infection, shoulder soreness, ankle soreness, infected toe. Today he's going to be in there, and on the whole, this team does look like it's going to be healthy. The only player on the injury report is Caleb Martin, but he's not all that significant with Butler, Hero, Lowry, all these guys active. So with all this being considered, and the Miami Heat team finally pretty much totally healthy for the core players, is there anything you really like to roster here, Terry?
I still think that Jimmy Butler's an interesting target, particularly the $8,000 price on FanDuel. It's got him 25% optimal in our early running numbers, 14% on DK at 8,500, multi-position on both sites, different positional eligibility, small forward shooting guard and small forward power forward. But I think he's a nice piece. He's going to get ownership attention, but I think it's warranted. We know what Jimmy Butler can do. Even with everybody coming back, I don't think the price is entirely right for Butler on either site. So I'm fine getting to him. Duncan Robinson probably going to be in the starting lineup there if there's no Martin. So, he'd be an okay piece at 3,300 on the DK slate, 12.8% optimal, a little bit over owned, but there's nice room for a boom score, even for a low per minute guy, 0.69 fantasy points per minute. Nothing to write home about, but at that price, he could get it done. FanDuel, 4,300, just 1,000 more against the higher cap. I want almost nothing to do with him. Bam Adebayo kind of just is who he is, I think, on this slate. He's priced about right at 8,600 on FanDuel. 8,100. You can squeeze in a few shares of him on DK. He's that center eligibility, though, so you're playing the center util combination game with him. 11% optimal and over owned. There's probably better pieces, but he's not off the board entirely for me on the DK slate there.
It's just there's no priorities here for me. Yeah. It's a team when everybody's healthy. Here's generally what happens. A lot of times these guys will get priced up because other players have been out. And that's actually not really the case here for Miami, but still it's so much production that, Tyler Hero is the one guy that is pretty priced up, 7,400 for him on DK, also on FanDuel. There was times we were playing him, in the high 5K, low 6K range with players out. And that's just not the case anymore with his current salary. So I think Butler and Adebayo, if you're playing a bunch of lineups and you have these guys in, 10% or so, that seems about appropriate for me, maybe a little bit higher for Jimmy Butler. No real priorities here on the Miami side. Moving over to Minnesota, who is a fairly difficult matchup playing against Miami, because especially when Miami is healthy, this is one of the best defenses in all of the NBA, but potential for value in the backcourt here for Minnesota. Patrick Beverley, questionable to play. He had, I think it was an ear injury he had to leave last night's game early with. didn't finish the game. Jordan McLaughlin also questionable to play. Now, Malik Beasley started the second half in place of Patrick Beverley. So with that in mind, I assume that if Beverley's out, we would see Beasley start again. Are you under the same impression? And would Beasley look like a good value play to you if he's in the starting lineup?
Yeah, that is the impression that I get, depending on where you look. Some places have Beverley in, some have no notes on him whatsoever, but Beasley in the starting lineup. That's kind of the impression that I get just based on, what they usually do with him. We've got him projected in the early run with Beverley in at 20.7 minutes, and he's irrelevant on either site. If you give that a kick by, 8, 10, 12 minutes, does it get him to full relevance? Probably not. Maybe on the DK slate at 4,800, he stays a little interesting. Maybe he climbs into that, 12 to 15% optimal range, probably around that price. It's a guess. At 5,400 on FanDuel, I don't know that I need Malik Beasley at that price. 0.78 fantasy point per minute performer over the last 3 with a little bit of additional run, 0.98 or call it 0.99 if we're rounding up for him. So around a fantasy point per minute in a good situation. I don't love it. He's a guy, there might be some bias creeping in on that one, though. So it's definitely one I'll be curious to see when we get that news, what it does with his optimal numbers in our sims, where he comes out in some of my sims. Right now, it's not a play I'd be excited about, but it would be one on DK that I'd at least keep an eye on and see where his numbers go.
In general, I think it's hard to, at this point in the season, roster any of Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and D'Angelo Russell, and all 3 of them are active. But with that said, Anthony Edwards is only $6,900 over on FanDuel, and this is going to have to be a FanDuel-specific conversation when it comes to Anthony Edwards, because I think he's about appropriately priced at $7,600 on DraftKings. He struggled. He has struggled a good amount over the last couple of weeks, missed games due to knee soreness, and even when he's played, it seems like it's something that's bothered him a little bit. But a $6,900 price tag for Anthony Edwards on FanDuel is a pretty cheap price relative to where he was earlier in the season. Are you willing to roll the dice with him at a depressed price and just hope that he's starting to get healthier?
Yeah, he's been coming up a good amount as his price has been declining for me, so I don't expect that to change here at $6,900 on FanDuel. Small forward and shooting guard eligibility too, so it makes him nice and flexible around the board. You can do good things with him, and there is that expectation. I mean, he's a 1.05 fantasy point per minute performer for the season. Over the last 3, he's been a 1.1 performer, so it's still right there. It hasn't totally abandoned him. 39.1 FanDuel points in 34 minutes last night, so around a fantasy point per minute and change. I like him at that price. I'm kind of hesitant about it. I don't know that I would get way over the field. I might just roster him at or about where the field comes in, maybe a little bit more, but it's not one where I'm going to like if the field is at 10%. We've got him 8.9 right now. Let's call it 10%. It's not one where I'm looking to come in at 40% if the field's at 10% necessarily. I don't think he's got that much edge on the field, but I do think there's a little bit there at price. On the DK slate, like you were saying, at 7,600 just kind of renders him irrelevant outside of maybe a few mix and match shares. He does have that nice 5-position eligibility. That's really the only asset for him on DK.
And then is there anything else here to see from Minnesota? I think this is one of the teams in the worst situations on the entire slate. And we've got guys like Cat and Russell, both a little bit priced up because of the time that Anthony Edwards has missed. So I don't see anything that I want to be getting to from here outside of some shares of Edwards over on FanDuel. Anything else that we should be mentioning here?
I mean, Karl Anthony Towns at 9,400, it doesn't make the numbers pop necessarily, but that's probably something where I'll grab a few shares, maybe press beyond the field. We've got him basically at doubled up on his optimal rate as compared to his ownership right now. Nice little leverage situation. He's owned in the low single digits at 3.5% on FanDuel. So that's a situation where I just see Apex player at a reasonable price. I'm not saying he's necessarily cheap. I do think it's a little bit low for him at 94. So I'll squeeze a few additional shares, but I'm talking about if the field's at 5, I'll go to 10, 12, somewhere around there. The center spot is just difficult on FanDuel. If he was that price on DK where we've got the flexibility, I'd be a lot more interested, but at 10.6 on DK, he's pretty tough. So not really going out of my way for Towns, but on FanDuel, I'll grab a few extra shares in 150 lineups.
Next game to talk about, the San Antonio Spurs at home against the Indiana Pacers. Weirdly, like half the games on today's slate have a 5.5 total. This being another one of those. Spurs favored by 5.5 at home against the Pacers. Long injury report here for San Antonio. Doug McDermott, Josh Primo, Keita Bates-Diop, Romeo Langford, Devontae Cacok, all questionable to play. Individually, none of these guys are all that important, but we saw a bunch of them out last night, and as a result, Josh Richardson ended up entering the starting lineup and playing 34 minutes. If that happens again, I think he's an interesting value option. but there's a whole lot of injuries that we still need to get to go his way. And I'm not exactly sure what to make of it at this point, because once again, McDermott, Primo, Bates-Jop, Langford, Kaycock, all questionable to play. We're going to need a little bit more information here, but do you think we could see Richardson draw into the starting lineup again?
I think we could. I mean, he's got the experience. It's, it makes sense that just considering how that team is coached, that would be the guy that they land on, given the injuries, given the absences. So it would be driven entirely by that group of guys being out. But there's definitely a path. I mean, we did just see it last night, like you said. So it's not the most unrealistic proposition in the world. And if he does, we've got him slated right now at 27.5 minutes. That makes him pretty interesting on both sites. He's 3,600 on DK, 5-position eligibility, 3,700 on FanDuel, small forward and shooting guard eligibility. He's over 15% optimal on both sites, over 20% boom score probability with positive leverage across the board at that price. I think the leverage right now is probably coming a little bit from just a low ownership projection based on we're not sure what the role is going to be. The public's not going out of the way right now to get to him. But I think that would inflate at that price if we see him announced in the starting lineup. Does it push the optimal rates? It might draw like even with them, but I think he stays a good play. Just one of those cheapo building block type plays that's going to be popular, but worth getting to at that point. So just another one we got to keep our eye on the news later in the day.
And then as far as pay-up options go, we have DeJounte Murray in a good spot today. Yesterday was a pretty tough matchup for him against the Utah Jazz, which made me not really like him all that much as a points per dollar option. Today, easier matchup against the Indiana Pacers. Where does DeJounte Murray rate out for you in terms of priorities as a pay-up option? Because we have a lot of good guys to pay up for. Of course, Denver playing, which means there's a Nikola Jokic slate. DeJounte Murray, still somebody you think you're going to be wanting to get to today?
Yeah, it's tricky. If we're sorting by our optimal metrics, our probability metrics in either the optimal rate or the boom score, a lot of the high salary guys are coming up with strong probability numbers today. So it creates kind of a logjam at the upper end of salary. Looking at that board, Murray is in the top 4 on the FanDuel slate, the top 3 at 10-8 on the FanDuel slate with point guard and shooting guard eligibility. On DK, if I do the same sort, he drops a few spots. He's point guard only, same price, 10-8 against the lower cap over there, 14.9% optimal on DK, where he's cracking the 20% optimal mark on FanDuel. So I think on FanDuel, I'll probably still get there. Maybe not in the 20% range. We've got the field projected a little bit below 20%, so there's technically positive leverage. He's a tough ask at 10-8, though. I love the production. I love the player, but there are a lot of other options in that general range today. So it's tricky to say exactly how many shares I'll come up with, but I like to play better on the FanDuel slate, a little bit less on DK, where it's just tough to get to that salary. I do think he could easily produce a nice game for us, though. 1.42 for the season, 1.55 over the last 3 games. Plays his ass off every night, 54.8 FanDuel points in 37 minutes last night. There's nothing not to like about the player. The price makes it a little tricky.
And just the competition. We have, like I said, Jokic is playing tonight. Giannis is playing tonight. We've gotten to a point where Murray has been so good since Derek White has gotten traded from a fantasy perspective that he's priced fairly similarly to these guys. And you have to start to ask yourself, do we like DeJounte Murray? Yes, everybody likes DeJounte Murray, but I'd rather play Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic. Not really. It's not really some sort of black eye or defamation of DeJounte Murray. It's those guys are better fantasy producers. So they're going to be higher.
I mean, it's a compliment to put him in that conversation with those two guys. You're talking about guys who are both 1.73 fantasy point per minute players, and both over the last 3 have been at 1.96. I mean, that's bonkers production. So to even have him in that conversation is, I think, complimentary to the kid.
And let's talk about the Indiana Pacers now on the opposite side of this game. One player on the injury report that generally has been really difficult to predict is Goga Bitadze. There's been games where he's been chalk and he's started and he's played like 7 minutes as a starter. And then there's been other days where he comes off the bench and nobody's considering him. He's sub 1% owned. And hey, look, Goga is like 30 fantasy points in 18 minutes. For today, though, he's questionable to play. And it's been really difficult to nail down the minutes in the Indiana Pacers front court. But if Goga does indeed end up sitting, does this make any of O'Shea Brissett, Isaiah Jackson, Jalen Smith, would any of them become good value options to you?
I mean, Jackson has been doing it, right? 1.33 for the season, 1.49 over the last 3 games in 19 minutes a night. He doesn't get a ton of run in normal situations. Right now, we've got him projected at 23.3 minutes, which is 10 more minutes than he normally gets. And he's looking like an interesting play. 5,000 on the DK slate, 55 on FanDuel, power forward on FanDuel, power forward and center on DK. Comes up in the high teens in terms of our optimal rate, and he's positively leveraged right now. Another spot where on news we might see some ownership increase, but I don't really think it's going to catch up entirely to his optimal rates. We haven't really seen him go off in a situation where he's over-owned. He's usually at best efficiently owned, and he's been in a strong ownership position in most of the slates where he's come in and produced. So he'd be the target. Right now, we've got Goga projected in for 18 minutes. I would give O'Shea Brissett, a little bit of a kick on that, but we've got him at 26.9 minutes right now. 0.80 fantasy points per minute for the season. He's 5,100 on FanDuel. He's 54 on DK. I don't really see getting to O'Shea Brissett, even with a little kicker. If we took him from 27 minutes to like 32, I still really don't see getting there all that much. So he's not that firmly on the board. I would be more interested in Jackson here.
Yeah, and then as for the rest of this team, Halliburton's gotten to be pretty pricey now. Same with Buddy Hield. These were guys who were priority plays for quite some time. Not the case for me anymore. I know that there's no Lance Stevenson. There's no Malcolm Brogdon. Even so, I think the prices here have become a little bit prohibitive at this point. Do you see it any differently?
Not really. I total agreement on like Duarte, Buddy Hield. I think Halliburton at 83 point guard and shooting guard on FanDuel has a little bit of juice left in there to squeeze. 22.5% optimal. He's a little over-owned in our early projections, 25% boom score probability and a 41-point FanDuel median projection. I can get behind that for 83. I totally agree with you. At 9,000, he's up there now on the DK slate, under 10% optimal. He's still mix and match caliber there. You can get to him. You can get around a good game from him, but I think we're pushing the ceiling there in terms of what we can reasonably expect from the kid salary-wise. So FanDuel, yes on Halliburton. DK, no on really any of those guys outside of, a share that lands here, a share that lands there.
Any other thoughts on this game? Or if not, we could move on to the next one.
No, nothing really jumps out. I mean, it's a lot of mix and match type pieces that you can get to. Like I wouldn't begrudge any, couple Keldon Johnson shares as a flyer, but not standing out in any kind of a way from the other side of this game. Similar story with a lot of these guys like Hield and Duarte, who I mentioned before, are both firmly in that territory. Throw them into a couple lineups if you get them, but don't sweat it if you don't have any shares.
All right, Tara, are you aware that we recently launched a premium betting Discord? Do you know about this?
I might have heard about that somewhere behind the scenes. That might have crossed my desk at one point. Yeah, I did.
I know it's something that's been occupying a lot of Terry's time. And right now, it's something that we just started. And we do have a discount going on if you guys are signing up for the first time, lasting until March 17th. Clearly, because the reason people sign up for these things, it's just based on what the discount code is. And this is let me see those picks. So if you sign up for a premium Discord channel, you'll get full access for just $15 using the promo code let me see those picks. Now, I've been trying to get whoever came up with that promo code to out themselves at our company. Nobody will own up to it. Nobody wants to admit to making the worst promo code ever. Let me see those picks. Whoever it is, reveal yourself. We've been doing some investigation. Myself, Lofty, Joey Corman's behind it too, because he doesn't want to take any responsibility. He's the guy a lot of people are pointing fingers at. But if you guys do want to check this out, I think this is a good time, especially because March Madness is about to come up. There's going to be a lot of betting involved with that. So guys like Alex, you guys know Alex Baker, Steve Buzzard, Ben Rossa, they've been putting out picks in our Discord channel. It's cheap. It pays for itself. They're all profitable sports bettors. So I think it's something you guys should be taking advantage of using the best promo code ever. Let me see those picks, which is in no way complicated at all. All right, let's move on.
I do have a little behind the scenes info for you.
Oh my God.
I might be able to drop some breadcrumbs. I don't know. This is a situation where you should be dropping a 20 in my hand for a tip or something if we were to, a cop and a criminal doing an investigation. But I do happen to know who created the code, who put it into the system, not who came up with it, just the person who received it and actually had to pop it into the system and hit, yes, this is actually what we want as our promo code.
It was you, wasn't it? It was you.
And that was yours. That was yours truly. So I did see it beforehand, but I did not come up with it. I will also say that we had a second one that was something along the lines of I'm a beta user for the people who participated in our beta test. And I did change that one to beta tester or beta tester reward instead of I'm a beta user, which I thought might offend a few people.
I would recommend bets next time. Something that's easy to remember because
I agree. Our March Madness promo, believe it or not, the one that I came up with is, you want to guess at it? Do you think I used March or Madness?
Maybe NCAA.
I used Madness. All caps,
Okay.
Madness. It's also up on the website, by the way, guys. Speaking of that, that's going to launch on Monday, but it's actually technically up there for you to buy right now. Covers you with everything, projections, tournament bracket tool, all that good stuff. $10 off with promo code Madness. You can find that in the same promos link on our website.
All right, let's hit on the next game now. Chicago Bulls against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Pretty important game for the standings here. Bulls a slight favorite, but also dealing with injuries. Zach LaVine, he is questionable to play. He's been dealing with knee soreness for quite some time, kind of similar to the Anthony Edwards situation where we've seen LaVine play just as we've seen Edwards play, but neither of them have looked quite like themselves as of late. So LaVine is questionable. Also, Alex Caruso is questionable. He's on the mend and close to returning. I don't even mind. We could do Caruso promo codes. We've done those in the past. That makes a little sense. Let me see those picks. That's no good. But for today, what do you expect to see from Chicago if LaVine and Caruso are both out? Who become the priority plays from the Bulls?
I mean, we've seen guys like the Sunmu step into the role and kind of go off there. Javonte Green is on the board because he's super cheap. He's sitting there at 24.1 minutes right now, 6% optimal on both sites, 3,400 on DK, 3,800 on FanDuel. He's a guy who could be like a sneaky little low-cost value play anyway. If he sneaks into a few more minutes here, that could definitely get interesting for me. We're talking about a guy who's a 0.74 fantasy point per minute performer over the course of the season, Dosunmu 0.71. But we've seen Dosunmu in particular go off in one or two spots where he was entirely unowned and unexpected. So I think we could definitely benefit from that. We've got the obvious names of DeMar DeRozan from the semi-star level up at the top. He's a little bit pricey. He's been worthwhile at that 9,600 price on the FanDuel slate, 95 on DK. He's just kind of around who he is. He doesn't look like anything exceptional or anything different than what he normally is, but that makes him perfectly fine to play. He's owned efficiently on both sites, so there's nothing overly targetable there, but he's perfectly fine. If I had him in a lineup, I wouldn't take him out. Vooch, by the same token, 19% optimal on FanDuel, 17% on DK, is pulling some interest from me. So it would really be looking at like the two star pieces or star-ish type pieces, and then maybe some of those value guys that would sneak into the middle.
Yeah, there's just extra usage to go around. It's a team with DeRozan, with Vooch, with LaVine. It's a lot of star power there. It's a lot of guys to take shots. And, if we take one of those guys out of the mix, then it makes DeRozan, although DeRozan's a little pricey, but even so, he would look a little more favorable. And I would actually really like Vooch in that kind of situation because he's been priced down a little bit. So he would become the priority play for me from Chicago if LaVine ends up being ruled out. And there's an injury situation on the other side of this game too, Terry, because Karis LeVert is questionable to play. Now, LeVert hasn't played since, when was the last time LeVert played? LeVert last played February 15th. So it's been about a month off for LeVert. If he does come back, I think it's reasonable to expect a minutes restriction. But I just think there's a trickle-down effect. Even if we're going to be getting 26 minutes from Karis LeVert, that's less minutes to go to guys like Cedi Osman, Rajon Rondo, Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, those guys who were mostly fringe options before. They're totally out of play. But also, there's less usage for Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Lauri Markkanen, and Kevin Love. So I think if we see LeVert back in the mix, even if it's only mid-20s minutes, it kind of takes everybody out of play from Cleveland. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I'm just trying to take a look at the usage and the pricing all at the same time to see if I can assess the full question. Yeah, I think I would, because 8,500 for Garland now. I like him at that price without LeVert out there. I think there's enough room for him at that price. He's been playing really well. 92 on DK starts to squeeze him a little bit, but I think there's still room there. But yeah, you put LeVert back into the situation. Looking at the when LeVert was here, 27.2% usage for LeVert. And let's see where the hell he went to. Why am I? Oh, I know why, because I'm still on the Pacers. I forgot to switch it to Cleveland. Forget
yeah,
the usage conversation in terms of what it does for Levert there. I was on the Pacers and I just typed Levert in, and since he was on that team, he popped up. So yeah, assuming that we're taking a decent enough chunk of usage away from Garland, away from the rest of these guys, I do think it has that downstream impact where it just shaves enough that these guys haven't been priced for that situation that it's going to have that effect. So yeah, it would probably take most of these guys out of play for me. Kevin Love is kind of interesting at no ownership whatsoever. If those minutes hold, 24-ish minutes, no ownership, pretty cheap at 5,900 on FanDuel, 64 on DK. If that holds, maybe that's a target for just some, oddball little shares as a dart throw, but nobody really would stand out. I don't think. I think it would flatten everybody else's outlook.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that there. If LeVert plays, I think the Cavs are maybe the least interesting team on the entire slate. So you need an injury update there. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the content we have for the rest of the day. And there's a lot of it, not just for NBA, NHL strategy show, MMA live before lock, and then NBA deeper dive, NBA live before lock. So if you guys are stuck inside because of bad weather, like myself and Terry, good news. We got you covered with DFS content for the entire day. Next game on the slate to talk about, and this is going to be a great game to watch for real life perspective and could have some fantasy appeal as well, because the Golden State Warriors at home against the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm actually a little bit surprised to see the Golden State Warriors are favored in this game. It's something that I might end up betting on the Milwaukee Bucks as underdogs after the show ends. But from the Warriors' point of side of this game, Klay Thompson has a little bit of upside. We've all seen Jordan Poole. His minutes have started to see an uptick. Kevon Looney has played exceptionally well this year, and he remains really cheap on DK. Actually, $4,400 for Looney, I think, makes him one of the better value options that we have on the board right now, because as well as he's played, I don't really understand how he hasn't become more expensive. But what stands out to you from the Warriors?
Looney's an interesting spot there. The guy that really, just looking at the board, pops the most is the Klay Thompson number on the FanDuel slate at 6,000. We've got him coming up 24% optimal, 30% boom score probability at that number. Nice little spot for Klay. The field's on it. It makes sense that the field is on it, but I think it's comfy enough that we can get into that spot with some ownership on it. At 7,000 on DK, 5-position eligibility, he's fine. He's owned pretty efficiently. He's 11% optimal, 20% boom score. It's not the standout play that it is for 1,000 less on against a higher cap on FanDuel for Klay, but I think he's playable over there, which is applicable to Jordan Poole, Curry. Bielitsa even seems playable over there, and he's got a little bit of leverage at 3,300 on that slate. 3,600 on FanDuel doesn't really do much for him. It's a weird spot. 33 on DK, power forward center, nicely optimal. 36 at power forward on FanDuel, barely on the board. And then, like you were saying, Looney has been productive, 1.0 fantasy points per minute on 12.7% usage across all situations this season. In the last three, ticked up to 1.13 fantasy points per minute in 25.7 minutes. So seeing a little bit of additional run there. We've got him projected for 25 minutes. I like him at that price. I think he makes sense as kind of a movable part on the FanDuel slate, and then maybe a little bit more on the DK slate where you can roster two centers.
Yeah, 4,900 on FanDuel. I still think it's a little bit too cheap, but the difference with getting him over on DraftKings is just the ability to play in multiple positions, and he's cheaper at only $4,400. So as the slate currently stands, with a bunch of guys listed as questionable and not knowing who's in or out, from what we know right now, I think Looney is one of the better value options. Steph Curry, a little more playable to me on FanDuel than he is on DK. Also been a weird shooting season for him. Hard to really know what to make of it, because Steph Curry has been one of the best shooters in the league for so long. And, he still is, but relative to Steph Curry standards, he's shooting below 40% from three, which never happens. His career low is, I think, 41% off the top of my head, and he's barely shooting above league average this year. So that's something that's maybe a little bit concerning at his age. There's obviously still upside for a Steph Curry game where he just goes absolutely bonkers, but we've got other guys to prioritize on the high end. Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo is on the other side of this game. And that is what I want to ask you about next, Terry. We have Giannis as a really good pay-up option. We have Jokic as a really good pay-up option. But if you have the salary to spend up for either of them, which are you prioritizing?
Boy, that's always the tricky part of this one, right? It's a tough decision on either site. With Giannis on FanDuel having power forward and small forward eligibility, it puts him in the mix with a lot of other pieces that are not Giannis, but that can maybe formulate Giannis in the aggregate once you start mixing and matching and having some value from, not spending. You're picking up $200 if you go to Jokic. And I think Jokic stands taller above the other options at his position in terms of ceiling, in terms of general production on the average, than Giannis does. It's a clunky way to say that because it sounds like I'm saying Giannis is not as good as Jokic comparative to the other options at his position. Fantasy score wise and salary wise, I think on FanDuel with the one center positioning, I think it fits that way. I think it would be Jokic. On DK, I think it probably is still Jokic just based on where we've got him in terms of the optimal rate. It's a little bit higher, but it's a different conversation. They're 12-2 and 12-1, and they both have center eligibility on DK. And you can play both of them if you wanted to side by side. Good luck figuring that out with a viable upside lineup. But I think I would probably lean Jokic on that side as well, but it's closer on that side just by virtue of how the positioning works.
Everybody knows where I stand at this point in the season. It is always Jokic for me. Jokic has been my guy this entire season, and he hasn't done anything to make me feel otherwise. There has not been a slate for a very, very long time that I've projected anybody for more fantasy points than Nikola Jokic. Today's no different. It's Jokic over Giannis for me, but Giannis is a fine, like 1B option. And it's going to be a thing where maybe for every 6 lineups I have Jokic of, 3 or 4 with Giannis or something along those lines. So lean towards Jokic. Giannis still certainly in play for me, though. As for the other guys on Milwaukee, I don't find anything to be massively appealing. I know Bobby Portis has had some big games as of late, but he's become more expensive. Middleton, Drew Holiday, these guys are also pretty pricey, and it's a difficult matchup on the road in Golden State. Golden State has had one of the top defenses in the NBA this year. It's a little bit worse than what it was earlier in this season with Draymond out. Still an elite defense, though. Is there anything else outside of Giannis that you do really like getting to from Milwaukee?
I would take shares of all 3 of the other primary players, Middleton, Portis, and Drew Holiday. They're all reasonably on the board in terms of their optimal rates, and they're all outpacing their ownership right now as far as the probability marks go compared to their ownership. Not a single one of them is a standout play. Not a single one of them is somebody I'm going to go out of my way and roster, 50, 60% of or anything crazy like that. They're roster them around or slightly ahead of the field's, 10% rates of ownership on most of these plays. Drew at 1.7% ownership on FanDuel is kind of interesting. He's 8,700 though. So 7.4% optimal, nice little leverage score. I don't know if I can justify paying 87 for Drew on this slate in too many lineups, but I do like how that ownership stacks up in low single digits over there. So each one of those guys just kind of mix and matches type play. I wouldn't take them out of a lineup, but I wouldn't go out of my way to put them in.
We go right from talking about Giannis to talk about Nikola Jokic. Purposefully lined these guys up back-to-back in the games when I was putting together the run sheet. And beyond just me projecting Jokic with more fantasy points than anybody else basically every single night he plays, there's another reason I prefer Jokic to Giannis tonight, and that is currently on the Denver Nuggets injury report. Aaron Gordon is questionable and Will Barton is questionable. This team is so thin on depth that if you take anybody that's important for this team off the court, you're just getting to even more of a role for Nikola Jokic, which seems impossible. But if you're taking Gordon and Barton potentially off the court, I don't see how Jokic just doesn't become insane rates across the board. He might have to play a couple extra minutes. Usage is going to be up. Assist rate is going to be up. So that's one of the other reasons too that I look at Jokic ahead of Giannis, because Gordon and Barton are questionable. What do you make of these guys being on the injury report?
Yeah, that's a great call. I had glanced at their injury report and processed it through that like, yeah, great, they're all hurt again. So I didn't really think that through, but that's a great call. That's going to give Jokic another little uptick. We know that he's the prime scorer, the prime facilitator, and the prime rebounder on this team under normal circumstances. You said it's going to give him crazy rates. I mean, we're talking about a guy who under normal circumstances on the average has a 65.3% true shooting, a 40% assist percentage, and a 21% rebounding percentage. Those are absurd numbers already. They stack up to a 1.73 per minute mark. Like I said, over the last 3 games, he's been 1.95. There's nothing not to love about Nikola Jokic. And yeah, with the idea that he might be over 2 fantasy points per minute tonight, that's just bonkers. It's absolutely justifiable to pay any price for him. So love the spot, love the player, definitely excited to roster him. Back to the Giannis comp though, like you said, he's 1B. It's not like you're making a mistake if you put Giannis into a lineup instead of Jokic. It's just a preference and angle into the slate kind of a question, really. It's they're 1A, 1B on this slate.
And then getting back to this injury report for the Denver Nuggets with Gordon and Barton questionable, Jokic would benefit with both of them out just from a standpoint of he already does everything. Now he has to do like more of everything for the team if these guys don't play. But from a value standpoint, is there anybody that you think you would see standing out if there is no Gordon or Barton? Surely there has to be one or two value plays that would step up. Who do you think those guys could be?
I mean, the also questionable Bones Highland could see a nice little uptick if he's out on the court right now. We've got him projected in at 19.6 minutes, but that's also with Barton and everybody in. So if we remove those guys, there could be a few extra minutes for Bones. He's been a 0.93 fantasy point per minute player over the course of the season, 1.13 over the last 3 games in a limited role. If he sees a little bit more action, a little bit more importance in the rotation, I think there could be value there. A guy like Jeff or even JaMychal Green could step in and pick up some minutes and be wildly unproductive and wildly uninteresting. They're both 0.7-ish kind of players in the recent term. Over the course of the season, JaMychal's been a 0.98 guy, but I tend to not really look at him like that. He's a 0.87 last year. I think he's more in that 0.85, 0.87 type of range in general from what we should expect from him. Monte Morris should be in the starting lineup regardless. He could be a little bit interesting just by that same virtue of just a little bit more to do if other key players are not in the rotation, not in the starting lineup. Not a guy I ever really go out of my way to roster unless it's a real extreme situation though either. So not anything that I'm particularly interested in. It's really prime Jokic spot.
Yeah, I think if there's no Gordon or Barton, I'll end up projecting JaMychal Green and Jeff Green both for more minutes, which I think would make both of them look like pretty good value options at cheaper price tags. And honestly, at least as of now, a little bit wanting for value. We just don't have that many cheap guys to go to. I want to play Jokic. I want to play Giannis. I'm going to need some value options. Yeah. And if Gordon and Barton are out, I think the guys are going to become Jeff Green and JaMychal Green there. We'll have to see what the starting lineup looks like and what the injury report ultimately ends up holding when we get an update there. On the other side of this game for the Toronto Raptors, fairly healthy team. OG Anunoby remains out with his fractured finger, but Gary Trent, Scotty Barnes, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, these guys are all going to be active. Way different price tags for these guys on FanDuel as compared to DraftKings. DraftKings, I found most of these guys to be a little bit overpriced to fairly priced. What are you making them on FanDuel where they're considerably cheaper?
Yeah, they're in that spot where they're all, Siakam, VanVleet, and Gary Trent are all definitely playable. They're frequently optimal targets. They've got nice boom score marks. They're underpriced for who they are. We are in that situation where when everybody's healthy, they kind of fall back to being like just, average, decently above average producers rather than standout producers that we get when one of them's missing. So it's a situation where I'm not thrilled about getting to them, but I just feel like they're going to land in a lot of lineups by virtue of their prices and where we have them projected right now. They're all at fair prices. I'm going to probably try to undercut the field on them just because I do that a lot with this team. In a lot of spots, I think it's an equitable distribution of fantasy scoring, and it's a little bit difficult to nail down. But I expect that I will have a good amount of Raptors through a bunch of different lineup combinations. The flexibility on Gary Trent at shooting guard and small forward for 6,000, that definitely interests me here. VanVleet throwing him into the mix with the other point guards. He's point guard only on the FanDuel slate. Makes it a little bit challenging to justify using him. I do love the price, 7,600, but there are other guards I want to get to. And it's a similar story with Siakam at 8,200. I think he's, kind of in the mix with some other players that might be more expensive, but might be a better thing to try and clear out some salary to get to over him. So they're on the board, but they're not the most exciting plays for me.
And as for the cheaper guys on Toronto, I just can't play any of them, mainly for this reason. The starters and the core guys play so many minutes for the Raptors. Gary Trent, Scotty Barnes, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam. These are all players we should be expecting around 40 minutes from. There just isn't playing time to go around to other guys. The Raptors traded a first-round pick for Thaddeus Young at the trade deadline to ultimately play him, 16 to 18 minutes per game. It's a viable role player for a real-life NBA standpoint, but it's not of minutes for a DFS standpoint. I just can't get to any of these guys for cheap, even if they're some okay fantasy producers because of the lack of minutes. Are there any value plays you're looking at to get to from Toronto?
Not without news. If we had some kind of news on Thad Young getting 25, 26 minutes at 3,700 on FanDuel, 3,400 on DK, that could be interesting. Right now, he's not projected for much. 17.2 minutes doesn't really have him getting much relevance. Similar story with Boucher. We've got him at 21.7, played 12 minutes last night, put up 12 points, 12 fantasy points. That's who he is. He's around a point per minute player. So it's just going to depend on any kind of minutes projection. Right now, no values from this team.
All right, so let's hit on a team that I think could produce some value. The Utah Jazz at home against the Sacramento Kings. They have a really good matchup. As such, they are the biggest favorite on the slate. The Kings have really struggled since trading for Domantas Sabonis. They actually now have a record quite a bit worse with Sabonis than when they had with Halliburton before the trade deadline. But we also now have from the Utah Jazz, Bojan Bogdanovic. He's questionable. He missed last game. And then Mike Conley, with this being the tail end of a back-to-back, he fairly typically rests in back-to-back situations. And with the Kings being big underdogs to the Jazz in this spot, I think it's reasonable to think that Conley's more likely to sit than end up playing today just because of the second game consecutive night, his history of hamstring issues. I don't think he's going to play. So let's look at a situation where if there is no Conley and there is no Bogdanovic, what would stand out from the Utah Jazz? Because I think this could be one of those spots for value that lets us pay up for some of the stars we like.
Yeah, so we've seen this situation fairly recently, and we've seen Trent Forrest get a little bit of an uptick. 3,700 at shooting guard on FanDuel, 3,000 flat minimum 5-position eligibility on DK. If we kick his minutes, he's at 19.1 and not on the board right now. But if we give him a little kick, I think that would make him extremely interesting from the value perspective. From like the mid-range, the lower mid-range, actually, is kind of cheap. 4,600 point guard shooting guard, 4,700 point, same eligibility on DK. Jordan Clarkson would get a nice little kick there. We've got him 25.6 minutes right now, and he's already on the board, 14.6% optimal on FanDuel, 16.1 on DK. It seems like he's pulling a lot of the ownership that normally may go to Conley or may go elsewhere. It seems like we're anticipating Conley being out with how we have the ownership right now. So Clarkson's negatively leveraged on both sites, but I think it's one of those spots where the negative leverage is pretty warranted for the potential production. So right now his probability marks don't reflect Conley being out, but his ownership does. So I expect that his numbers will kind of balance out if we get that Conley news early enough in the day for later updates to this tool. So those guys would be interesting. A player that I never like getting to, but he's projected at 26.5 minutes right now at 3,500 dead minimum on FanDuel, 3,400 on DK. Daniel House, 0.75 fantasy point per minute producer for the season, 0.68 over the last three. He's not a player that I ever really get excited about rostering, but if he's on the board at those prices and we give him a little kick in minutes, 26.5 right now, it's not one to get excited about, but I think it could be on the board there. So definitely some values to look for in that lineup.
Yeah, so, and I think there's something relevant here to talk about with Daniel House because he started last night for the Utah Jazz. And if there is no Conley, no Bogdanovic, I would expect House to start again today. Yep. Now, yesterday when I was doing the deeper dive and I was talking about House, I didn't like him at all as a play for this reason. There was so much value on yesterday. So we had all those Pelicans guys to consider. And I don't remember exactly all the games yesterday, but there was other teams that also presented good value options, but the Pelicans being the primary ones. And it was a spot where in order for Daniel House to be optimal, he didn't just need to have a good game on a points per dollar basis. He needed to outscore the Pelicans value guys, which I didn't think was all that likely. For today, we have stars to pay up for, and we have a lack of value right now. So if Daniel House starts, I would have him projected about the same as what I did yesterday, low 20s fantasy points, something around there. But he would be a way more appealing option today just because we don't have quite the same options on the cheap end. So if he ends up starting, I think he gets into play just for that reason. And then also without Mike Conley, we could expect Donovan Mitchell to take on a little bit more of a ball handling role to make him look better. And Rudy Gobert is just a little bit underpriced on both FanDuel and DraftKings for a really good matchup against the Kings, which would make him appealing. This is a game with a 230-point total, and the Jazz are 10-point favorites. So they have a very high individual team total. Now on the Kings side of the game, really difficult matchup for them on the road in Utah. We typically don't love rostering players against the Jazz, especially when Rudy Gobert is active. But is there anything here that does stand out to you, Terry?
No, everybody just kind of looks like who they are, right? They're all priced fairly appropriately. They're all pulling in middling rates in terms of our probability metrics. Nobody really jumps out. I wouldn't begrudge anybody a couple of shares of $8,400 a bonus on FanDuel. At 93, I don't think I would go there. By the same token, like a value play like Justin Holiday at 3,800 on the FanDuel slate, 3,600 on the DK slate, he could make things work. He's not drawing a ton of popularity. He's at that similar kind of a price tier to the guys that we were just talking about, Daniel House, Trent Forrest. So maybe as a guy who, has a fairly reliable 30-minute projection, he could sneak in as a value play, but he's a 0.66 fantasy point per minute performer for the season, 0.68 over the last 3. He is who he is, right? We're not expecting anything to make him stand out. But I think if you just want a dart throw of a value play and we're only looking to book that 20 and change fantasy points to get to pay up for something else, like what we were just talking about with House, I think he's at least a comparable play there and one that has those reliable minutes. So I don't love that spot either. I didn't love the House spot. But if you're considering one, I think you have to at least put the other on the board in that conversation. Nobody else really jumps out here. If you want to get to shares of the Aaron Fox, again, he is who he is. I wouldn't begrudge anybody at 91 on FanDuel. 94 on DK, probably pushing it a little bit. You can put him in a couple of lineups, but there's not a lot of room there.
Just one game to talk about on the slate, then we'll be done with the show. But first, Terry, what if you caught a break with the potential to net a couple $100,000 with less than $100 investment? We have great news because breaksofgod.com is the place to catch that break. Breaks of God is the latest sports card collecting trend to catch fire in America, and it's how sports card collectors are building high-value card collections without huge investments or risk. It's quickly become a popular and economical way for sports fans to get valuable and rare cards without having to buy a $1,500 boxer case themselves. All the cards are broken from sealed premium boxes live on Instagram, and the cards are shipped directly to you for free when the live stream is over. Slots are limited, so act fast. To learn more about how you can buy and hit big money cards, get 30% off your first break, click on the link in the video description below to go to breaksofgod.com /830. That is breaksofgod.com /830. Get 30% off your first break. Also, make sure to follow them on Instagram at Breaks of God. Final game to talk about here, Terry. Portland Trailblazers at home against the Washington Wizards. This is how poor the state of things are in Portland. They are at home. They're playing a not very good Washington Wizards team. This Washington Wizards team is on the tail end of a back-to-back, and the Washington Wizards are favored by 7.5 points because Anthony Simon's out, I assume, for the rest of the season. Damian Lillard is out for, I assume, the rest of the season. Yusuf Nurkic is out for, I assume, the rest of the season. Eric Bledsoe has not yet played for the Portland Trailblazers. Don't think that's ever going to happen. Justice Winslow is out. It's rough times in Portland. I know they have Josh Hart available. I don't even know how many minutes they're going to play Josh Hart because even though they traded for him at the deadline and he was their big piece that they got in that CJ McCollum trade, they're not playing in big minutes. Last couple of games, 26, 28, and 23 minutes the game before for Josh Hart. He's actually only eclipsed 30 minutes once in the last, or twice in the last month. It doesn't seem like they're going to really run Josh Hart into the ground here. Portland playing for nothing. It's tough to know what to make of this team. Some of the pricing is cheaper on FanDuel than it is on DK. Brandon Williams, 4,900. Drew Eubanks, 4,300. How are you going to handle this absolute shit of a team?
Yeah, sometimes these value teams where they're playing a bunch of kids and a bunch of, crappy back end of the rotation type guys in featured roles, it just gets tiring. I am so sick of this team at this point, but the values are still there. Brandon Williams, 4,900 at the point guard spot on FanDuel, has some value. He's owned 50% of the time, though. So we're talking about basically double the optimal rate, the worst play for leverage on the entire slate. And he's not like min price Brandon Williams now. So I think people might be overexcited about that spot. It still does rate out well in terms of our probability marks, but with roughly half the field going there, I'm going to try and find a different mid-range point guard to go to. So I think I'm going to scratch him just based on ownership unless things change outside of, where I need to, if I have exactly 4,900 and there's not another option, I guess he's the plug and play, but it's not somebody I want to really get excited about or go out of my way or build toward by any means. 6,200, he's kind of off the board on DK, still getting owned twice as much as his optimal rate, even at that inflated price. Drew Eubanks on the board again. CJ Ellaby on the board again. Trendon Watford kind of trending off the board. 5.6% optimal on FanDuel, dropped to 1.6 on DK because he's 6,100 over there now. Eubanks still 4,300 with multi-position on FanDuel. Fine. I'll take it. Not excited about it. 0.99 for the season, 0.70 the last 3 games when I've been playing them. So it's just not thrilling me. These guys are not good at basketball, but they're priced appropriately. So as value plays, yeah, you can get there. They're going to be popular. Got to focus on differentiating your lineups in other spots if you use them, and temper expectations because they're not great performers.
Yep. I think, and like you said, also the FanDuel versus DraftKings situation is totally different. I don't really want to play Brandon Williams at $6,200 over on DK. I don't know what to make of Josh Hart's minutes, but clearly a $5,900 price tag on FanDuel is way more appealing than $7,900 on DK. So for the most part, I think we kind of have to avoid these guys on DraftKings. On FanDuel, there is some consideration. Brandon Williams still obviously a good value play, just maybe going a little bit over owned right now. We'll see where those marks end up being later on in the day. Perhaps as more value opens up, his ownership share comes down, because points per dollar, he does look good. If you guys play cash games on FanDuel, you should certainly be considering Brandon Williams. Actually, not just considering, you have to play Brandon Williams in cash games on FanDuel if you're playing tonight, because he is, at least as of now, one of the top value options, even though, like we said, he's a little bit too popular for our liking. Now, on the Washington Wizards side of the game, we do have some injury news here because Kristaps Porzingis, who's been getting worked into the mix, been playing extended minutes as of late, starting to see a bigger role with the Washington Wizards. He's out today, resting, tail end of a back-to-back, trying to be cautious with their big men that they acquired at the trade deadline. So now, as a result, I think there's a lot of good value options to look at here. Rui Hachimura could be playing extended minutes. Daniel Gafford is probably going to play extended minutes. And keep in mind, very favorable matchup against this terrible Portland Trailblazers team. What stands out to you from a value perspective from Washington? I think this is one of the better cheap teams to look at with Porzingis out.
Yeah, so I mean, we've always got Kuzma on the board, who I have not succeeded with, but I think a lot of people have in some of his standout games so far this season. Priced at 8,900, he doesn't come up naturally a lot for me, and I still have issues with pushing him in for extra shares when he doesn't naturally get there. He's owned pretty efficiently, but I think it could be an interesting upside spot for him. Like you said, Rui is definitely interesting. 4,600 small forward, power forward on FanDuel, and 3,200 power forward on DK, especially, is very, very interesting in a situation where we should see him get additional minutes, like you were hinting at. 0.87 fantasy points per minute for the season, 0.95 over the last 3 games in 22 minutes a night. There's definitely meat on the bone if we see an uptick in minutes for Rui right now. We've got KP projected as in, but I think he is actually officially confirmed out, right? That was what I saw.
Yeah.
So we've got to get so we just got to get an update back-to-back,
and it's been planned rest. They said a few days ago he wouldn't play today.
Yeah, he's confirmed out already. So we got to get that updated. So we'll see some of this translate through. There are guys on this team that come through at mid-range values in a variety of playing combinations and opportunity situations, but none of them are great, like standout per minute guys for the season, like a Denny Avdija, a KCP. Any of these guys from the fair mid-range prices with a few additional minutes could pay off their salaries, but we're talking about guys, Avdija 0.82, KCP 0.74, and they perform like that in most situations, in recent situations. KCP 32.7 minutes a game over the last 3 has been a 0.75 fantasy point per minute player. He can produce a little upstart type of a game from the 5,800 salary tier. I like him better at 4,900 shooting guard only on DK, but they're just kind of mix-in options for me. They're not guys I'm really going out of my way for. The big men are kind of a little bit more interesting based on no KP.
It's funny how this game looks from a FanDuel versus DraftKings perspective, because Portland is way overpriced on DraftKings and underpriced on FanDuel. The Wizards are underpriced on DraftKings and overpriced on FanDuel. So Daniel Gafford, who I assume is going to start at center and should play pretty extended minutes without Porzingis in the mix, he looks like a pretty good value play to me at $3,700 on DK. Same for Rui at 3,200. But then when you're talking about these guys being over 5K on FanDuel, less appealing. So completely different site to site on both sides of this game. Any other further thoughts on this game or the slate as a whole, Terry? If not, we could wrap this up a few minutes early.
I just going back to the Brandon Williams conversation. I just started looking at point guard real quick and on that FanDuel slate and sorting by our optimal rate. And it's really interesting. If we get Mike Conley in, which I don't expect, but if he does happen to play tonight, $5,100 Mike Conley compared to $4,900 Brandon Williams is an interesting discussion at the point guard position on FanDuel to me. I think there's room to pivot off of that ridiculously high ownership and get into some underpriced Conley if we do get that situation. If we don't get Conley, You can get to Clarkson at 4,600 as a comparison point, 300 cheaper for Jordan Clarkson. He's also overowned, but not to the degree that Brandon Williams is. It's half the raw ownership. It's half the negative leverage, and a comparable optimal lineup rate, a comparable boom score probability from a player that's done it before. Everybody else is tougher to justify. Pat Bev is also questionable at 5,000. Then you're getting into like Trey Jones, Howell Neto type territory, and it gets really ugly really fast. You could get Bones Highland at 4,100. That could get a little bit interesting if you get a little uptick in minutes there. But yeah, it's a little tricky around that 4,900 price for Brandon Williams with all that ownership and with that negative leverage on him. So he's going to be a really interesting inflection point for how this slate goes. But like you said, cash play, I think you got to lock him in.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for us. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you to Yahoo for sponsoring the show. If you guys are signing up at Yahoo for the first time, sign up using the link in the description box below. If you head on over to Yahoo, make a deposit, enter a contest through that link, you'll get yourself 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum, and you'll give Terry some work to do because that is all done manually by Terry. So keep Terry employed. Sign up using the Yahoo link. Other than that, guys, lots of content coming up today. Check it out. Good luck today and have a great weekend.